So this is the director's commentary for Lobongier syndrome. Let's begin. So this is part one. My kind of whole reasoning for making part one was it was sort of just an idea that me and my brother and his friend had, where it's like, let's just do a movie. So we decided to make this, and this was all made in one day. It kind of shows it was all improv. We had really no plan. Yeah, there's a little kid looking up a shotgun. See, these characters are supposed to be a lot older in the movie, but clearly it looks very wrong out of context when you see a bunch of kids looking up the shotgun on their computer. But I'm the one filming here, obviously, and the funniest part about this, I think, is that the fact that he goes to the bathroom for 2 hours, which the reason for that is that we were going to film a scene where we show Daniel's character, Dr. Lobongier. He was going to be in the bathroom, and that's when, right here, when he knocks, we're going to, like, in the VHS scene, we're going to show Daniel in the bathroom to explain where he was during this scene the whole time as Michael's going through looking for him. And we could see here I'm actually sort of ducked behind his desk, and that was kind of interesting to film, where I had to keep me out of frame when like the beginning of the scene. Yeah, here I come. The lighting, I gotta say, is atrocious, and it kind of shows. Again, this was my first sort of movie I made. Like, yeah, it very much shows with the whole sort of lighting techniques and the fact that it's kind of shaky cam and the acting is a little atrocious. And yeah, you can't really see what's going on in this scene, but he was knocked down by Ethan, who later was recasted to Luke. And the reason why I recasted Ethan from me, yeah, there I am in the mask. The reason why I recasted me to is because Luke is more terrifying to look at when he's running at you with like a knife or something. So I figured, why don't I make him Ethan, and let's just see what happens. And I think it ended up working relatively well. And again, if I sound congested, I kind of am because allergies have been acting up. But yeah, I try to be a little artistic with this scene where it's him looking upwards, or the camera's looking up, but I ended up just kind of fucking it up because you don't really see at all what's going on. Like, you get a rough idea of what's going on, but it's so poorly shot, it's like barely even, just barely even like noticeable. Like, it's, you could see the Venom poster in the back and also, and we did actually have, I believe that's a zip tie. If you look on his hands, that's either a zip tie or a rope that we got. And yeah, originally we were gonna have handcuffs, but yeah, that takes a while to break out of. So yeah. And I think we filmed on different days, because if you look at Michael's shirt, it's completely different from the opening scene. That, or I think he changed clothes, but yeah, there's me. I like how he just sort of lets Michael pick up the screwdriver and stab him with it. But yeah, in part three, in part two, there's very much a disconnect from this one and the sequel, and I'll get more in depth when we get to part two. But for now, yeah, you can see there's Matthew. Originally, we were also going to have Matthew come back for part three, have him reprise his character, Dr. Lobongier, but he declined, unfortunately, so we got Daniel to replace him. And this scene also, in part three, we're going to have, like, build upon how he orchestrated this entire ordeal as well, even better, where, like I said before, we were going to have him in the bathroom, but later on we'd also show him like sneaking out, like, or at least in the background, like going to this room and just have him be there being ready to be, hey Michael, there's a guy out there, what's going on, all that stuff. And yeah, this VHS plot line gets picked up in part three, where this VHS becomes very important and we find out what exactly is on it. And I know a lot of people might be confused if this VHS is kind of the same as the one in part three. They are the same. It's just, I think, like, what we see here is only a segment of what's on the entire VHS tape, and I think I I want to say we have him re-record it over as like the sort of reason he added more footage onto it, but for here it's like just sort of the same, like a small segment of what's on the full thing, and we later see the full thing in part three. Um, I like how there's someone just recording him on VHS in 1992. But here we go in part two. This scene was very interesting to film. We had multiple takes where Brogan, the guy who plays Riley, he went off, man. He was just talking, screaming, and it got to, because everyone else in the house is trying to sleep at that point, so it's like, he's talking and screaming very loud, and we're trying to tell him to chill. Yeah, Luke improv that scene where he does that gesture to Riley, and there I am playing Ash. I completely improv. Again, part 1 and 2 are mainly improv. It's part 3 where we had a script going, but I sort of had a general outline of what the story was supposed to be. Like, even back then, when we filmed part 1 in 2019, I had an idea of what I wanted the series to be. I always wanted it to be 3 parts broken up. Like, it was meant to be one big movie broken up into 3 parts. And so that's why it really sort of helps the viewing if you just watch them all together instead of just like part 1 individually or like part 3 individually. And again, part 3 is the only one I really am okay or proud with, because it really does feel like a complete sort of short film. And again, here the Steven scene sort of takes up a good chunk of part 2, and I'm a little upset with that, where it's like this scene goes on. Again, part 2 was going to be a little longer, but we weren't able to add on or film more scenes for part 2. So again, this was just mainly like, let's just film a bunch of scenes together and let's just see what works. And this is what the outcome was. And I know there's probably a lot of confusion as to what the part 2 post-credits scene meant, and I'll explain it when we get there. But for now, like, you can tell this scene was obviously improv. And funny thing, this was actually filmed outside, like in the field where I used to work at a Burger King. So I kind of wanted that to be like an Easter egg, or, well, I'd be the only one who understood it. But you can tell I'm sitting there directionless. I don't really know what to do as Riley or Brogan to sort of doing his thing. So here I obviously try to like add some background where Ash is sort of, stressed, getting concerned with what's going on and all that. I thought this was an interesting locale to set a scene like this, because it looks creepy, unsettling, or uncanny to say the least, where it's like this sort of post-apocalyptic kind of like deserted field. But yeah, we were going to have Steven come back as Commander Steven for part 3. And again, if I wanted to do everything I wanted for part 3, it would have been a lot longer and a lot more packed with just in general more content than what we actually gave it. But I'm still, not to say that I'm not upset with how part 3 turned out. I liked part 3, but there was a lot more I wanted to do with it, if you catch my drift, where it's like Steven was going to come back. I think we were going to originally have him be Riley's new partner or his replacement, where it's like, you couldn't get this case done right, so now I have to assist you with it, sort of deal. And we were going to have him come back in that sense, or if not, we would just have him like a small cameo where he'd be at the very end when Riley's where he says, got a lot of paperwork to do, where that's obviously in reference to part 2, where Ash's line. And right here, a lot of people ask me, why did I put that flashback? That's really just because there was very little to do with part 1. So I kind of felt like I needed to add like a little link to the both. And again, we filmed this. We were originally going to have this in like the Walmart parking lot that we filmed this, but we almost got arrested because they thought we were stealing. So we figured, let's not like have a scene where we have a gun in a Walmart parking lot. So we just ended up filming in our high school parking lot, where it was empty, it was controlled, I wanted to say. But yeah, here was the big gut punch of part 2 that I wanted, where it was. And again, Ash, I kind of like how I wrote him in retrospect, where he's the tragic character that never got to really see his brother again. That was really his whole reason. But yeah, here's the post-credit scene in part 2. This was meant to be another scene in part 3 where Ethan gets disoriented, and it sort of explains why he's looking where he ends up in part 3, where he goes to the tape. It's like he wants to search out answers, but we didn't really get to do that because we couldn't really go back to that place to film that scene, so it ended up being on the cutting floor. But again, if I wanted to do that in part 3, it would have been a lot longer and a lot better than what you ended up getting. But not to say again that it's bad. I mean, to say that part 3 is bad is like, I mean, obviously it's amateur, but it's got, the whole series has this sense or this atmosphere of it just being a bunch of friends wanting to make a movie together. And I think it kind of works in that charm where it kind of, that's really the backbone of the entire series. Like, if you look past all the bad acting, it kind of more than makes up for it in that sense. But we have Riley's opening monologue here that Brogan sent me long before we even started filming for part 3. And I thought it was pretty good, so I included it in the recap trailer. And we had this opening monologue was a lot longer, like, so I wanted to cut it down for time's sake, because if we included the entire monologue, this would have been one of the longest parts of the movie, and I would have lost the audience's attention. So I just trimmed it down for time's sake and to keep the audience's attention going. But I believe when we come up here, we're gonna see the whole grave scene of Riley at Ash's grave, and I really like how I had the concept of, it's like, okay, now that Ash is dead, it's up to his partner Riley to carry out the mission to the end, to go hunt down this killer. Yeah, here it is. We filmed this scene the same day we filmed the fake scenes for the trailer as well, I believe, when we filmed the final battle scene, I want to say, though I'm not entirely sure. And again, this part 1 and 2 took about a day to make, but part 3 took us a month to make. When it came to script writing, it came to getting everyone together, filming locations, script reads. This took like a solid month of our time to make, and I hope everyone really enjoyed it. That was my one hope. And again, the soundtrack that you're hearing is composed by my buddy Jay, or Storm of Metal on Discord. The soundtrack originally was for the Brothers Country movie, which was a completely different canceled project that had a lot of development hell and a lot of just in general back and forth between the cast. It was another shit show. So I found the files to the soundtrack on my phone, and I gave them a listen, and I had the thought, hey, why don't we put these in part 3 as like an original soundtrack? And we did. And I credited him, of course. He was cool with it, so there's really no problem with that. I like how we have this scene originally where it's like he's pacing back and forth, figuring out what to do. He goes back to the crime scene. Originally, we were going to have the crime scene set somewhere else, but by the time we wanted to do that, it was like we were like rushing to get to the lake, because that was like the last big thing that we really had to do. It's like, let's just get to the lake, let's get it all done, let's go to the lake, sort of deal. Then again, that's the same screwdriver that was used in part 1, so you notice part 3 is very much more connected to part 1, where I really wanted part 3 to be the link and connector between the two, so it ties part 1 and 2 together and makes it make a little more sense, while also giving a somewhat, I hope, satisfying conclusion to the series. And of course, the big moment, the big surprise that we all were really excited to reveal when the movie dropped, but we couldn't in marketing due to it being that big of a surprise, was Alex coming back. We originally were going to have him in part 2, but he wasn't down to it. But after some persuading, we managed to get him in part 3, and that was like, okay, this has to be our Tobey Maguire moment of the movie, so let's keep him near the very end and make it a complete surprise he even came back. So we basically managed to keep him out of marketing like as much as possible. And when he does show up later, I'll explain more of that process. But here, this is actually a refilm of the scene that we did at my house in one of the trailers. And also, if you notice in the door hinge, you could see Luke walk by. We didn't catch that originally, but when we saw it, it was sort of like a funny little Easter egg that we decided to keep in. And we tried to keep this scene here, like the background noise, as little as possible. But the thing is that Daniel's parents, the guy who plays Dr. Lobongier here, they were just they had zero chill. They had no fucks given. So they were just like, all right, we were just like, all right, let's just get it done. Maybe we could explain the background noises, like maybe his wife or maybe like one of his sort of roommate or something like that. But you could clearly tell also we filmed on different days out of order. And that gun, the Mauser, is supposed to be Ash's gun. Like, that's his gun. Every time you see that gun, that's supposed to be Ash's gun. It's not, like, we obviously reuse the M1911 a lot. Same with the MPX, but that Mauser is supposed to be the same gun every time. And again, here, I like how we did that, where it looked more cinematic, where I liked how you showed Luke grabbing it from that angle, from inside that sort of shelf, and it looked really cool and all that. And I like how we did this, where it's confrontational. Ethan's right there. He's very much sort of a bit remorseful for what happened to part 2, but Riley's just not having it. And so the VHS, again, it's like the big plot point where it's them trying to get it in the big revelation. And the reason why Dr. Lobongier is going after it is because clearly it has incriminating evidence on it. So he's trying to get rid of it, in the sense that he doesn't want, incriminating evidence of him that could ruin his career out there. And I like how we did this fight scene again. It's like kind of like Last Airbender, where it's got that charm that we're just a bunch of people trying to make a movie to entertain people. And again, that's really my mindset of the day, is if you're entertained with my movies, that's all I care about. As long as you're God damn it, I just realized Daniel's poking his head from behind the fucking pillar. Son of a... But you can tell Luke's the only one that has a consistent wardrobe in the entirety of part 3. And again, this here is supposed to be like right before part 2. You can even tell towards the end of the scene that this is very much like right before part 2, where it's like now it's like a smooth, like in Rogue One, right, where it has a smooth transition from Rogue One to episode 4 Star Wars. I kind of wanted that to be like this here, where it's a smooth transition from part 3 to part 2 in the terms of the flashback scene here. And originally, we had a deleted scene where Ash wasn't even supposed to do all this. Or freak out like this. He was supposed to just stand there and be complacent, but I decided to have him sort of walk up and start screaming, losing his cool, to make the scene a little more interesting and give Ash in general just something to do other than just stand there. My nose is really congested from allergies, dude. But I do like this scene as well. It was a bit nerve-wracking to carry guns in public like this. Where especially I think there was a child having a lemonade stand in the background, so to see like they have orange tips on them, but it was still kind of nerve-wracking to have these guns just like in public like that. And we were gonna have a rope like right there when Ash goes to tie his hand. We were gonna have a rope to make it more seeming like it's connected to part 2. But we couldn't find it, so I used tape, which was kind of the next best thing in this situation. And here we have... A funny thing about this, Daniel was actually standing on a ladder to get this overhead, because Brogan was just so tall, so we had to get that overhead. And again, there you go, the smooth transition, and we get him waking up, and Daniel making a Skyrim reference here. And... I just like how we did the lake scene, which is coming up pretty soon. This scene was also filmed the same day we did the park scene. And funny story about the park scene, we walked almost about a mile to that park just to get that scene done. So if that doesn't tell you we had dedication for this, I don't know what will. And again, here's part 3's lake scene, which... I wanted the lake as like a cool backdrop for this scene, because I felt like it was sort of like a nod to my old project Valhalla Island, which is what something that was going to be after Lobongier syndrome, after I originally had canceled part 2 and 3. And so this is like a little in nod that the fact that this is like taking place on like this lake beach sort of deal is supposed to be like a little in reference to Valhalla Island. But again, that scene where Daniel is telling Brogan to put his gun on him is entirely, real. He was like, that's out of character and all that. Like, this is also foreshadowing that maybe Ethan isn't really sort of in control, which was going to be, we had more scenes showing that Ethan wasn't completely lucid during everything he was doing. So I'm a little upset we didn't really get to do those, because that really paints Ethan in the light in the sense that he was a more sympathetic character. But yeah, and again, these scenes were pretty good to film, or fun to film, in the sense that we got to film my dad's car there, where it's like it's also an explanation as to what that car is in the background of part 2, and that's explained to be Ash's or Riley's car, their squad car. And I get it was a truck in part 2, but that was sort of Commander Stevens' truck, or well, his real truck. And so when we had a bunch of complications behind the scenes, we couldn't really use that truck, so we decided to retcon it being the FJ Cruiser, the green one that you see in the background shots. And here, originally Rogan was supposed to walk down the stairs and such, but instead he decided to go immediately to the Daniel's room, and I was sneezing like hell, so we just decided to just keep it in, because we didn't want to stay around dust any longer, because I would have just kept sneezing. And again, you see that in part 3 bloopers, where it's just the sneezing. And again, in that box, why I emphasized that box earlier in the scene where they first meet sort of deal, is because inside that box is supposed to be the serum, the original serum that he used to make Ethan go crazy and such. And this scene right here in the VHS takes place right before part 1. And again, you sort of have that effect where part 1 is sort of being sped up, and the VHS right there is to sort of help link it together to make it a bit more cohesive. And again, you can clearly tell when it cuts back, like at the end of this part 1 rerun almost, or recap, you could tell we clearly filmed, like, some time has passed. Like, you could tell that was newly filmed for the part 3. And I wanted to have Matthew again come back, because it'd make a little more sense just for this one scene. But yeah, you could tell there's the big return, and this takes place right after part 1, where part 1 ended, where the VHS was ejected from the TV. They're watching it, and this is when, like, Michael's like, oh, my friend is actually a traitor and all that. And I really, fun fact, this was actually supposed to be the opening to part 2 if we got to do part 2 the way I intended it to be, like, where that was supposed to be the cold open where Michael died, and then it would have made his return in this a little more satisfying. But we didn't really get to do that, and I'm a little upset that we didn't get that entirely. But this scene right here is also, we filmed that at the lake, obviously, and I believe in the background for a split second when Ethan gives the camera back to Dr. Lobongier, you can actually see me and Brogan in the background, like behind the trees, like right at there. If you slowed it down, you could actually see us behind the trees. And that was kind of like a funny little reference. And again, I like how I did that effect, because the end tape part was blue screened onto here, and so I edited it in a way where the end tape would disappear right when the static happened and you get the colored bars. But this scene was like, oh, the big revelation, like, oh my god, the guy who I've been working with the entire time was actually the bad guy. And it was sort of really revealed in part 1, where it's like, yeah, Dr. Lobongier was the bad guy the whole time. It was more so like the surprise, like the audience was kind of waiting for Riley to catch up with the audience, in the sense that we knew Dr. Lobongier was in danger. And I like how it was sort of, that's all intentional to make it really more intense, because it's like, we know what Dr. Lobongier, he's secretly evil, and we know this, so it leaves you a little more on edge for Riley and, like, his safety, because he's hanging out with the bad guy essentially. And or in the garage scene where they originally like confront Ethan, we were gonna have Ethan was supposed to like have a look, and I believe he does, where he looks a little like recognizes Dr. Lobongier, and that's supposed to be a subtle nod or foreshadowing to the big twist where that they know each other this whole time. And again, here it's like we were gonna add on to this where Ethan finally is able to snap out of the mind control almost, and he's supposed to like be like, oh, I know what happens now, and he's supposed to hear this whole thing outside, and that's sort of his inclination to run back inside and try to help Riley. But I like how he tried to do this where the scene just keeps revving up in intensity as the conversation gets more heated, and the soundtrack, I think, beautifully sort of complements the scene where it rises and rises and rises in intensity until when Riley says, shut your fucking mouth, the music kicks in, and that's when sort of the climax happens and the such. And you can tell we filmed this during the final battle scene. And funny thing, Luke and Alex are in the other room as we are filming this, so that's how this is very much sort of on the same day we filmed the final battle. You can even tell from the cut from his the right side of Riley's cheek, that whole cut is basically from a cut or blooper where he ran into, because again, like we'll get to it when we get there, but here this was very much an interesting scene where we had Luke run at him, the big fight scene between the two where he's loose again. He knows what he's doing, and he's trying to help Riley take down the big bad guy. And here, yeah, there's obviously like a blooper. I try to shy away from that. But the funniest scene, my friend, is coming up, and that's right here where Luke almost throws it back. He starts twerking. So I quickly like shine away from that for obvious reasons. But here, you can tell, like, I love how he just has like an MP5 or a machine, SMG, just casually between a mini fridge and some drawers. And here we get the big sacrifice, Ethan dying. And yeah, originally Riley wasn't supposed to run out, like it was supposed to be like a big struggle between the two, and then Ethan runs in and gets him off him, and they like as Ethan's standing over to help Riley up, that's when Dr. Lobongier gets up and shoots him and kills him and all. And then here we go, the big sacrifice scene where I like how we did the music where it's kind of sad, but also it's like just melancholy almost. And then that sad scene. And here I had a lot of people ask me what this meant, in the sense that when it panned back to Ash and Ethan's grave, that's supposed to be like a 3 made from their graves, where it's supposed to be a meta representation that this is the 3rd in the franchise, but also 3 deaths occur in this movie. 3 deaths occur in the whole franchise: Dr. Lobongier, Ethan, and Ash. And here, this was probably our favorite scene to film, almost, where it's like this was the most fun scene to film, in my opinion. And you can see I kind of liked the whole comedic part of where instead of like saying something, Riley just cocks his gun in retaliation almost. And there's the serum and then the VHS as well. The best scene, in my opinion, in part 3 is coming up, where Alex makes his surprise return, and obviously with the music that accompanies it, it was obviously the biggest like surprise of the movie after him being absent from part 2 and all. And originally they didn't want to come back for it, but Alex did, so that's nice. And again, here when Riley gets stabbed, that was where he got the cut originally. From the first take, he leaned as he was running to Daniel with the knife. He leaned into the knife and cut the right or the left. I think it's the left side of his cheek, and explains the scar that he has on it. And yeah, here we go. I like the costume that we had here. Is very much supposed to invoke sort of like a Reaper look, where he came back from the dead, but also it kind of looks like the New Vegas Ranger from Fallout. And that was kind of, or the NCR Ranger from New Vegas. That was kind of funny. I do like how the music is synced up as Brogan grabs his hand and like gets up. And actually, that scene where Daniel trips over Brogan or Riley, he actually cut his knee like pretty badly, and so that's why he's kind of limping here as well, is because his knee was kind of cut like for like a really good cut almost, and he was bleeding after that. But he was a good sport. We were able to do this, and I don't know why he decided to start just fiddling with Riley's shoe, but he just decided to start doing that. And yes, his shirt is just a Naruto shirt, just inverted, because he wanted to have a black shirt for the movie and all. But here, his monologue was supposed to be very longer, which would have helped complement the joke of Michael coming up and shooting him in the head as like a funny thing, like, yo, you talk too much, and he just ends up killing him. But yeah, also, people have in the comments asked why Michael was the one to kill Dr. Lobongier and not Riley. That's because the whole betrayal scene and the fact that Michael was there from the very beginning, so I wanted to have him, the brother of Ash, avenge his brother with his brother's gun. And yeah, that's really it for the commentary. And again, that was supposed to be like the big he walks off into the sunset moment. Yeah, that is the director's commentary. Thank you for listening / watching. See ya.